This is Breaking Down Security. Very cool. So we've only mentioned browsers, but is there support in, I don't know, frameworks like Drupal? Do any of the major frameworks like WordPress or Drupal support using CSP specifically?
That's a good question because actually, yes, there is some support. But if you think, there's a question: what kind of support we can think of in a framework? Because if you think about just a basic content security policy, you don't really need much support in a framework. You actually don't want the framework to be really heavily involved in generating the CSP for the reasons I have mentioned before.
Mm-hmm.
You usually want to separate the content security policy and define it on a web server, for example, not on the application server.
Yeah.
But there actually is a place where you have to have the framework support CSP, which is, for example, those inline JavaScript blocks.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you want to use a feature that is called the kind of temporary whitelisting for inline blocks called nonces, then you actually do need framework to generate those nonces for you.
Okay.
And I would say for any other feature of CSP, you don't really need support on the application server.
Okay. Well, I was just thinking about stuff you create on the fly, like I don't know, like blogs or something where you're, if you put up a video or something to something other than YouTube, you're going to have your HTML being generated on the fly, and then how do you go in and add your CSP, or how do you make sure that the content is going to post properly or show properly if you have to go in and manually edit your generated HTML on the afterwards.
So the idea is here, the philosophy of CSP here is quite simple. I mean, if you do allow that your users are posting videos to, like, let's say LiveLeak or something like that,
mm-hmm.
Then this LiveLeak domain should be on the CSP, and you should manually add it to the list. Otherwise, users can really load anything. So, I think the dynamic generation of CSP doesn't really make much sense because this way it loses the whole kind of sense of being a static whitelist of what the website owner allows.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's granularity there. I mean, you wouldn't want to allow the entire YouTube domain, right? If you were trying to secure it, you would want to allow for specific, that specific link or that specific video. You wouldn't want to just whitelist YouTube.com, right?
Mm-hmm. I mean, you could add all the YouTube URLs, the film URLs that you want to load. I think it would just make the policy very large.
Yeah.
So the idea is basically to put the domains or partial domains to the. My thinking is that if you want to allow movies from YouTube, you just put the whole domain there.
Mm.
And
okay.
this is not really about. It's about origin whitelisting. If you don't want to allow specific movies, it's probably up to the. It's not the level where you do this. You don't do this on CSP basis. You do this a bit higher in the application itself.
Okay. So, it sounds like that there are still a few gotchas in that case. I mean, depending on how granular you want to allow, the content on your site. Are there any tools that somebody could use to, other than running it through a browser, to make sure that your content security policy makes sense before you implemented it?
Yes, absolutely. And there's, I mean, if you uh, use whatever framework of choice, you can currently find tools that will allow you to fine tune or generate the content security policy supporting your framework. There's quite a lot of tools that are implemented as browser extensions, and probably the simplest tool you can use is the JavaScript console in every browser out on the market. So if you go to any website that uses content security policy and you enable the Java console, you will see a notification, a JavaScript error for every single violation out there, which is very useful because you essentially take all these violations and based on them, you update your content security policy. You allow whatever you want to allow and you just ignore whatever you don't want to allow. Mm-hmm. There is actually even more powerful mechanism built into CSP, which we haven't discussed so far yet, which is remote reporting, which essentially means that the same message that is displayed to you in the JavaScript console, you can also send to a remote website. This can be your own website, a special JSON receiver that basically takes all the violation alerts and stores them for processing, or this can be an external website like one I have implemented for my own project, which is called basically cspbuilder.info, which essentially takes all my report. You can also use it, it's open, and summarizes them in a easy to view form, and finally allows you to allow things, approve some things, and those things that you approved are then converted into a ready-to-use HTTP header. So it's a kind of wizard. So yeah, I think this is probably, I mean, if you have a page, if you have a website that is really simple and you build it from scratch, it's quite easy to build a CSP header for such a website. Unfortunately, if you have a website which you built like 10 years ago, and I tell this, firsthand, and you want to add content security policy to this type of website, kind of retroactively, it will be much more challenging because you will be having tons of pages hidden somewhere, we long forgotten about on this website, which link to some kind of external images, films, or whatever, that will be blocked by content security policy whenever some user will visit them through Google, and you may not, never know about those pages because you've just forgotten about them. So in this case, this type of remote alert collector is very, very useful because suddenly you start to see, let's say, an image from some common criteria portal, for example, or ISO 27 portal, which you linked 5 years ago, and the image is there. It's displaying normally. Unfortunately, it's just being blocked by CSP.
I see. Okay. So I just went to your website, content or cspbuilder.info, and so this is still in beta. Is this something that you can release to people, or is this just something that they can use directly?
I mean, it's in beta. The only reason why it says it's in beta is so that people don't complain too much when it's sometimes something is crashing. But it's fully operational. It's open. You don't need to even register. You just use a unique identifier and start collecting the alerts.
Okay.
That's it.
So you're in Google beta, so it's going to be in beta for like a long time. Then is what you're saying?
Well, whenever it starts working stable, I will just remove this. I mean, it does work stable.
Sure.
Sometimes it's just I'm doing some reboots or something. So, but in general, it works. Yeah.
All right. That's pretty interesting how you've got a security content. So the reporting only reports on violations. It won't fire just to say that. I don't know. I was trying to figure out if there was a way to do a false
Yeah.
positive or a false negative or.
Yeah, so exactly. That's the whole thing that we also haven't mentioned yet in details. The content security policy comes in two flavors. So the one that you should start with is content security policy report only,
Mm-hmm.
which is a soft form, which basically means that whatever the browser would block, it will not block, it will just report it, which is excellent for testing the policy.
Mm-hmm.
And it completely doesn't hurt the normal user experience. The user will not even see that CSP is enabled. When you are finished and your CSP header is up to date and contains all the sources you want to allow, you can switch to the actual content security policy header, which is the enforcement version, and it's quite hardcore. I mean, if it doesn't list what you need to list, your website may just stop displaying properly.
Okay.
So
will it give you some kind of warning message to say, okay, your browser, could you have some kind of warning message saying, like let's say an image doesn't load, could you say this is blocked by your CSP policy or?
No, you don't see anything like that from the user point of view. Only you can see this in the JavaScript console.
Okay. And the
But
JavaScript console would only show if you actually visited your own page.
no. JavaScript console will show the warnings to every user that visits the page.
Okay, so even a bad guy would be able to see that he's been blocked according to a specific policy.
Absolutely, yes, they will. Yeah, they will do.
Okay, so it's almost like an IDS where you put it in listening mode and you check to see if everything works properly, and then you turn it on, and it will. It's actually a preventer, so it would not load anything at all.
Yeah, it is preventer, but I mean the comparison to IPS or firewall is not fair here, because in case of CSP, you are announcing your rule set to the whole world.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not really like a firewall where you don't know the rule set; you have to probe it. In case of CSP, it's basically the website announces list of trusted sources, and whatever is not on the list is blocked. And the error messages are just for the convenience of the web developer.
Okay. Yeah, I guess that's true. If you do a view source on the page, you would actually be able to see your CSP, right?
Yes, absolutely. If you open the development console, or you just use a curl or some other tool to see the HTTP,
Mm-hmm.
you'll see the header. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so if you were, well, you're probably familiar with Burp or Zap or something, you would definitely see them inside the headers there.
Oh yeah, absolutely. They are all there.
All right, and would you be able to remove those out of the header and defeat CSP in that respect?
Well, if you control the web server somehow, then yes, you could remove it. There is one specific vulnerability that I can think of that would allow you to do that. It's the HTTP header injection.
Mm-hmm.
Because this way you could kind of, if you are lucky, you could kind of terminate the HTTP response early before the CSP header is displayed.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is the only way to do this. But okay. I mean, if you got HTTP header injection in a web page, you can do much more harm than just breaking CSP.
Yeah. Well, I was wondering if some kind of man-in-the-middle attack, like when you mentioned terminating the HTTP early, reminded me a lot of when we were talking to Lee Brotherston about how his ISP was basically terminating his HTTP connection at a server in their environment and then loading a page that they had already preloaded. If you had something in your for CSP, would that have allowed his ISP to continue doing a man-in-the-middle on him if he was to set his CSP to block anything coming from a specific server?
Oh, yeah. This is actually a very interesting observation because this is what is actually happening quite a lot on live websites. So if you go to the cspbuilder.info, there is on a main page there are 3 links to you can see the internals of the incoming alerts for 3 of my web pages. They are completely open. You can just go and see them. And if you go and look at what kind of sources are being blocked on those pages, you will see that there is, with me having the content security policy on these pages finished and ready for production, there is still quite a lot of the content being blocked. And if you look what kind of origins are blocked, it's all kind of nonsense things like some malware domains, some spyware domains, and so on. And there's also quite a lot of origin domains that are local IPs. So, those from 1111 or which is, I think, used by MikroTik routers, or some, RFC 1918 IPs.
Yeah. Here's a couple from image source 10.42.6.84. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, for example. So there is a question how this got in there. It's very simple. Those are resources that are injected to the web pages of people browsing my pages.
That's fantastic.
Yes, and CSP is blocking them. It's blocking this injected content. So if you got some kind of super saver spyware add-on in your browser, it will normally track every page that you visit by basically injecting a piece of JavaScript code in the page. It will either just track your visits, or it can display a bar on the top offering some extremely cheap Viagra pills or something like that. When you visit a web page with CSP enabled, this content will be blocked and it will be reported to the web page if the page is using the reporting feature. So it's actually a very interesting tool as well to detect all kind of malware or ISP injection, because this is also catching content injected by hotspots, some local ISPs, and so on. I have actually written an article based on this observation a couple of months ago. It's also on my webpage.
That's fantastic. I will definitely have to introduce you to Lee. He when he gave his talk at Sector, he had talked about his ISP doing the man in the middle, and he said it wasn't just his ISP, that there are tons of others doing the same thing. So that will be quite interesting. So the only problem is any site he goes to, unless it has CSP on it, it will still be allowed to inject things into his stream. So it's not going to be perfect. If you go to Facebook, it's still going to be able to, if there's a non-HTTPS website that isn't using CSP, it's still going to be able to inject things in, right? You won't be able to add CSP yourself on the fly.
The malicious or tracking JavaScript will be injected, but it will be not rendered by the browser if you use CSP, which is a really good thing. I mean, if the ISP is CSP aware, it could block the CSP content, but I don't think they are really aware of it yet.
I know that they were adding things inside of his header, like the Verizon super cookies and those kinds of things. But I definitely will introduce you to Lee, because I think that's impressive. So you've created this tool. Anybody can use it. It's free. I assume they just can put it in anywhere on your page. They can use the page identifier. So is there anything else that you're working on with regards to content security policy?
Yes, I have also worked a bit on an extension for Django, the Python framework, which is called Django Security. Oh. And Django Security has now for a year or so, because I added it quite a long time ago. It also has now support for generating the CSP header. Even though I mentioned before, it's probably not the best idea, and it's just easier to do this in a web browser. But also, it allows you to collect the CSP reports. So you can have a collector, CSP alert report collector, in your own Django application.
Okay, and the reports that you're collecting outside of Django, we were talking about the reporting earlier. You can use to help build external whitelists, I would imagine, or add to your hosts file, perhaps, maybe to block on the front end as a user.
No, I think this is mostly useful for website owners. So basically, if you build a new website and you want to add CSP, sorry, you got really three choices. One is you just build the website and then you try to use the JavaScript console only to see what are the blocked contents that you may have missed when building a website, and add them to the CSP header. The second solution is to use your local CSP collector, CSP report collector, and you can use Django for that, the Django security extension for that.
Okay.
Or if you don't want to collect those alerts, because then obviously you have to manage them, you have to store them in a database, you have to delete them, and so on, you can just use CSP builder.info for collecting them.
Okay. Excellent. All right. Well, man, I've learned way more than I expected to learn, which is always a good thing for me. So when you're not doing content security policy, the way I found you was you were updating the OWASP blog on content security policy, but you also your website at what was that site? It was called IPsec.pl. That's right. Yeah. So IPsec, is that the VPN thing, or does that have another connotation for you?
Oh no! I mean the name of the page is historical reasons. I was once designing an IPsec router for Polish governmental organizations a long time ago.
Oh my!
And basically, I was interested in IPsec standards at the time and just made this website. But since then, it's just about everything related to application security, really. So it's became kind of personal blog, and I was writing recently about things like CSP malware detection, which we discussed. I was writing about CREP penetration testing reports, which I've seen plenty of as well, and so on and so on. So many topics, really.
Yeah. So on back in September of 2014, on 4 September, you talked about an empty blocked URI. Is that wait a minute, let me see there. So you mentioned 1.1. One of the other things I wanted to mention is I saw a tweet from Mike West, who works at Google. Apparently he's kind of a big deal in the CSP world, and he's working on the second generation CSP level CSP 2, not level 2, but 2. Is there anything new in that one that we have to worry about or can implement, or is it a different implementation altogether?
No. It's not sure if it's the same what I'm currently looking at W3C website, because it seems to be quite new. And there's also the draft that is published or developed on GitHub, and I tend to track this one. So this is probably the one. It's a development version of the standard. The latest additions, I think, were some. You can define a list of allowed plugin types. So, for example, you can explicitly mention that you do allow Flash movies or Java applets on your website. There were some additional standards I would say, because they already evolved into separate standards added to CSP related to referrer policy. So what the browser should do with the referrer header. And there was another one which was dealing with mixed content. So if you load a page through HTTPS, but it refers to some external images or whatever over non-HTTPS protocol. So I think these were the main additions to the latest version.
Okay. So on that policy, it's got version 7.16 where it mentions sandboxing. Is that something new to this new version as well?
Oh no, sandboxing was in CSP from version 1.0. So it's I don't think it's new. There may be some additions to the actual sandbox keyword, but the idea of sandbox is quite simple. It's basically a page for which you set the CSP header may ask the browsers to sandbox itself, so to sandbox it basically.
Okay.
Which makes sense in some scenarios where you load kind of third-party content or possibly untrusted content through this URL. So that's about sandboxing. There's a few more additions, if I remember correctly. There is another option called reflected XSS. So it's essentially a mirror of the XSS protection HTTP header. And there is another one which is called frame ancestors, which is kind of re-implementation of X-frame options header. So as you can see, the standard developers started to kind of integrate all these separate HTTP headers into content security policy. And it makes a lot of sense because of a ton of, weird-looking HTTP headers. You just have one CSP with a couple of options.
Yeah. Okay. So the sandboxing, it sounds like there's another layer to it. Like, I mentioned earlier with blogs, if you wanted to, whitelist, Flash video, for instance, or maybe even an ad banner, could you sandbox specific elements inside the page, or are you sandboxing basically the whole site when that happens?
Well, yeah. So if you want to sandbox, for example, on my page, I'm displaying Google Ads, right? So just for a matter of experiment, I managed to put those ads in a sandbox. Not that they are very harmful usually, but just to test the concept.
Sure.
It's all about basically putting them into an iframe with sandbox attribute and just allowing a few script and a few other options for the ads to work correctly. And this is kind of top-bottom sandboxing. So you write the HTML and then you add the sandbox keyword to the iframe where you load the external content. But there's another direction. There are other way to sandbox things, which I could call bottom top, which basically means that the URL that you sandbox, the URL itself returns sandbox in content security policy, which will have the same effect from the browser point of view.
That's fantastic. Is there any way to make this an enterprise level thing? So let's say you've got a bunch of browsers. Let's say you're running IE because you're a Windows shop, or if you're a Mac shop and you're running Safari. Is there any way to centralize this? You said you could send the reporting somewhere else. Is there an easier way to centralize the reporting so that if you did find somebody violating policy, I don't know, you could use this as a way, I guess, to make sure that your acceptable use policies are being followed. For instance, if somebody was to go to, bad sites or something like that, is there a way to easily, manage this so that it would light off alerts for you if you were having to maintain an acceptable use policy?
Well, I don't think you can actually monitor acceptable use with CSP. What you can monitor, for example, is okay. I mean, if you allow people to add URLs to custom images, to
Hmm.
add images to your HTML, then
Hmm.
yes, you could kind of enforce the allowed sources.
Okay.
But otherwise, uh, I mean, if you only allow static text, static content, then the content security policy will be also fully defined and controlled by yourself. The reporting feature is quite cool at the development stage. It's very, very helpful. But after you have reached a stability of your content security policy and it's ready for production and the website passes all your tests, you will only see this spyware nonsense in reports.
Okay.
Because I mean, you will see this always. So this is the moment you just stopped watching the reports because there's so many of them and they are basically not very useful for you. I mean, you can't really improve anything at this stage, well, except for allowing the spyware domains, which doesn't make much sense.
Okay. All right. Oh wow. Okay, we're we went longer than I thought we would. I always say that we're trying to shoot for 30 minutes of good audio, but man, we hit about an hour, so we're well over our threshold for now. So your blog is ipsec.pl. I'm looking at it right now, and there's a lot of good information on there talking about everything from security policy, content security policy to blacklisting with OpenWRT. There's some. He's got a blog here about GCC security features and how much they cost with regard to compiling and code speed. So definitely a renaissance man with regard to security. And I would love to have you back again to talk about any one of those blog posts. So, other than ipsec.pl, how would somebody get a hold of you if they wanted to talk to you? Perhaps maybe ask you some more questions about content security policy.
Well, so essentially, you can find me on Twitter, and you have already added my tweet ID on your when you announced this nice talk.
Mm-hmm.
I live in Reading, which is next to London, and I'm almost on every OWASP meeting in London.
Okay.
So yeah, I'm quite active in OWASP as well, and essentially you can find me on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on Google Plus, everywhere essentially. So.
Okay. Let's see. You're at was that Kravitz KRAVIETZ2. So that's
on Twitter.
On
yeah,
Twitter, yeah.
Correct.
So that's how somebody would get a hold of you. You're on LinkedIn, so you're big with the OWASP folks over in London. Do you go to any B-sides or any security conventions over there?
Yes, absolutely. I visit Black Hat Europe. Try to go to every InfoSec in London, and I also try to go to every AppSec
Nice.
Europe conference.
Nice. Okay. Have you given any talks or anything that we could link to, perhaps?
I was giving quite a lot of talks on OWASP Poland meetings and also on quite a lot of conferences. A few years ago, I mean, I was doing like 5 presentations per year.
Oh wow!
But then I just don't have time recently. Became too lazy to do that.
No, that's cool. All right, so yeah, they'll hit him up on his blog and his Twitter and everything. And wow, Pavel, it's been a pleasure. And like we said, if you want to come back on and talk or rant, or if if you want to come on and talk about internet censorship in Russia, like one of your blog posts talked about, we'd love to have you on to talk about all of that stuff. So I'm sorry Mr. Boettcher was not here to hear this. He's going to be so envious of me. So Pavel, again, thank you for coming on to Breaking Down Security.
Yeah, thanks, Brian.
Yeah.
Hope to see you again.
Cool. So you can get a hold of Brian Boettcher he's on Twitter at BoettcherPwned. I'm at Brian Break. We have a Facebook fan page at facebook.com/breakingdownsec. We're on Google and Twitter, and you can find us on LinkedIn as well. Just search for our names. And this has been a fantastic episode of Breaking Down Security. Episode is in the hopper, and you have yourself a great day, and we'll see you soon.